Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Today we are celebrating Engineering Week. This is our week. So, yeah, right? So we have a couple of announcements to make today. I know we sent out an email to everyone mentioning that we'll be giving away 2 awards this week. So we originally had the Young Civil Engineer of the Year and the Civil Engineer of the Year award, but we received more nominations than expected, and we thought that all of the nominees deserved an award. So the first award is the Outstanding Volunteer of the Year. It's going to Patrick Dean Martin. He worked for CDM Smith. He's not here today, but he's a graduate from Virginia Tech, and he's been with the ASCE since 2018, and he became the president of the younger member group last year. He's a very active member. He recruited several members for the ASCE younger member group, and he's always been a part of many social events the past few years. So Pat couldn't be here today because he's doing volunteer work in Virginia right now. So he's definitely deserving of this award. I'm not sure if Pat is like.
Yep, I'm calling in, Melody. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Patrick. Thank you again for your service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next one is the Young Civil Engineer Award. It goes to Jennifer Smith. Jennifer graduated from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. She's been a member of the ASCE since 2016. That was since she was in college. She's been very active ever since. She moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, and joined the ASCE Younger Member Group and the Eastern Branch. She served as the Younger Member Group president back in 2020, and she's currently serving as the Duke University Practitioner Advisor with the Eastern Branch. She always volunteers for our event. Jennifer is not here today because she's on vacation, but I would like to thank you for her service and her commitment. Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Next award is a Government Civil Engineer of the Year. It goes to David Kiker. He is a graduate from Virginia Tech, graduated with a bachelor's degree back in 1987. I wasn't even born yet. He has over 33 years of experience in water resources management. His coworkers describe him as being very knowledgeable, helpful, friendly. He's the kind of coworkers who never say no to helping people. He's been working with the city of Raleigh for over 7 years. David was unable to make it today to our in-person meeting due to previous engagement with his work. We would like to thank David for his service. And service. Thank you, David. The Civil Engineer of the Year 2023 goes to Keith Rines, who is our speaker of the day.
I'm not available.
So this is another graduate from Virginia Tech, who graduated in 1994. He's been involved with the ASCE since before 2017, I believe. Because when I was a student, you was way before, since you was in college. There you go. He's been president of the Eastern Branch, and he's our current treasurer. He's been treasurer for like so many years. And one thing I can say about Keith is that he never says no to volunteer for events. So this month, the speaker of the February month canceled last minute, and Keith was like, you know what, I can do it. And that's one of the things that I really like about Keith. He's always volunteer to help out. So Keith, thank you very much for your service to the ASCE, and yeah, thank you for your commitment. Keith is going to talk to us today about how to solve a travel project, and this is based on 2 case studies.
Thank you, Melody. So I wanted to start off with using an analogy of having a train wreck project. I don't know, show of hands, anybody ever had a train wreck project? Or am I going to be talking a foreign language to everybody? So real quick, some of what the purpose of what's going on here today is I'm going to kind of explain what some of the common problems are that you could have with a CPM schedule. I want to introduce to you Takt planning. And then I'm going to show you 2 examples of where we implemented it on some projects, and then share the lessons learned that we had for that. So we'll start off with an example here, a personal example of, is there anybody other bikers in the group? Bicycles? So one of the things that, a good way of thinking about how a typical schedule, CPM schedule is set up, it's usually in a push planning kind of a version. So as you see it on the screen, this would be something of everybody's just trying to get up the hill. They're going at their own pace. There's not necessarily organization, aside from the fact that this is on a closed road. So don't worry of people just being obnoxious on an open road. But one of the things that can happen is you can have the frustration then, if you're the driver behind all of this, you're going to have that frustration. Be similar to an owner having frustration of things are moving, project is moving forward, but it's not in an organized fashion. And so one of the things that you can do is, obviously the other extreme of that is the pool planning. And this would be similar to if you have people on track bikes that are very well organized machine, they can all follow each other, they cut down, there's higher efficiency, you can reduce the drag that you're having, you can have better flow on your project. So moving into what is a trouble project. So as you can see in the orange and green curves, the original plan was very tight together. The two were very narrow to each other. So they were going to have to accomplish this job very efficiently. And they were doing a pretty good job about up until halfway, until May of 2019. And then they just kind of stagnated and they didn't make the progress. They never made that turn to go up through to accomplish the rest of the project. So almost at when they were originally planning to be complete, they were about 20% complete versus they should have been up at about 80% complete. So what happened? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through doing it from a delay analysis perspective. I'm trying to show of things you can do prospectively in the middle of the project. So what happens is you have chaos and panic, and everybody's just in panic mode. And if you saw my presentation a couple years ago, I had some examples of the different phases of a project. But like I said, I'm not going to go into that today. So one of the main things that happens, so the scheduler will create a schedule at the very beginning of the job. Sometimes it's at the bid time, and they'll kind of come up with an idea. They'll put placeholder activities in there of should be about 2 weeks, or it could be 4 weeks, or they'll put something in there, and they'll make assumptions that they'll validate later on. Hopefully you would be able to get input from the subcontractors to be able to get a duration that is based on production. That's the best way of approaching the duration of an activity. And so one of the examples that I enjoy using is this one of, you have 2 activities for electrical. You have rough in and you have trim out. So the question is, which one of these 2 has pull wire, make terminations in the electrical room, turn on, test, set the equipment, connect the equipment, all those kinds of things? Which one of the 2 activities has that? I'm assuming that the scheduler has it in the schedule and it's not a scope gap that is possibly happening on your project. But once again, you either have to make you need to write down the assumptions if you're helping evaluate or there's questions of this nature, so that later on everybody knows what's going on the project. And so multiply that by 3,000 more times, and you can get a schedule that looks like this. And this is actual schedule from one of my projects that I have. So all the little yellow squares are the activities. All the black lines are all the connections that go between these activities. And so one of the questions is, what happens when the field staff or the subcontractor or whoever else would look at the schedule? You don't always look at it in this view, this type of view, but how do they understand and can use an schedule that is complicated and not something, and that they're CPM illiterate? And it's not a slam on anybody in the field. It's just not everybody understands exactly all the ins and outs of what you see on a piece of paper, because there's a lot of background information that you don't see in a PDF version of a schedule. If you have the native file, and some people even get the native file, they don't even know how to open it or how to use the software for it. So it's not a bad thing, but it's just one of those of what happens on the job site. And so what happens is you have the original plan. It's rarely revised. Most of the time, some owners will say the baseline is etched in stone. You can never touch it ever again. That's a wrong approach, because the project needs to live and breathe, because there may be unknown conditions that pop up. There's other things that can happen on a project. So usually what happens is the field guys will kind of come up with their own plan. Sometimes the CPM will be kind of updated at a monthly basis, and then you have other, the weekly or daily or weekly schedule will be at the field level. Those two don't always line up with each other. And so whenever then you try to mix the two together, you end up with something that just becomes chaos. And, and one of the reasons why there's a difference between all of these is incomplete work. So on the screen, this is just a snippet of some of the activities. These are all activities that had less than 12 days of originally planned durations, things that should have happened in about 2 weeks or so time frame. They're all extended out at least 30 work days. They've all grown at least 6 times as long as an activity. And most of them are shown like 80, 90% complete. So one of the first question is the activity incomplete because there's a change order or something happening in the field that's holding back that activity from being able to complete? Or is it one of those of the miscommunication from knowing if the first activity included, pulling wire in the electrical example that I had earlier. So not having a good understanding of what the scope of the activities are is something that can hurt you when you're going through a project. And some of these may have been generic placeholder type activities. And this is, once again, this is from a real project that I had. And one of the activities, if you can read it, is there was one for installing the fire extinguisher cabinets. Something that goes into the hallways is, it's a cutout in the wall. They were going to insert the fire extinguisher cabinets. Should have been a 2 or 3 day activity. Makes perfect sense to everybody, right? This thing has been dragging on. I mean, one of the problems was they didn't coordinate some of the MEP in wall. So they went to cut the hole out, put the thing in, there was utilities in the way. So it was kind of, how did somebody miss that? And once again, you're not trying to point the fingers at each other to determine what that answer is at this stage. It's just more of, this is something that's happening. How are you going to deal with it? How can you resolve the issue to get the project moving to get to the completion date? And like I said, some of the reasons that can be for having waste on a project, they're listed on the screen here. I found a paper that actually took these 8 categories and broke it down into 49 different reasons. And of course, there are different ones in each of the categories. And they weren't all construction related. Some of them were design related. Some of them were procurement related. Some of them were obviously for construction. But you can have issues of where you're not able to capture what's actually happening. So you would get variances on the activity durations. Some of the reasons are inadequate scope, definition, change conditions. You have roadblocks in the project. You need to create a buffer. There's incomplete physical work, quality issues, and just inaccurate recording of the percent completes on the project. Like I said, some of that leads you into loss of productivity. You can have waste on the project, and you just need to be able to have coordination on what's going on. And one of the things that's hard to know is it's hard to measure any of these things if you're not actually tracking what's going on. So here's an example from that previous project that I was just showing you the slide on, of where I divided up the project by floor. And then in the blue bars, I showed how many of the activities for that floor were shown, what the percent complete was for the activities that existed. The flip side is the gray bars of where that's how much money has been earned on each of the floors. And you see some of them are pretty close, some of them have a gap in there. And one of the reasons for the gap is because there's work in progress, so they haven't completed the work. So we're trying to get the contractor in this example to focus on completing some of their work so that we can get caught up. Because one of the things that makes it linger is the contractor, the subcontractors aren't getting paid for any of the extra effort that they have to perform because they've already been paid to do the work. So if it does become something of a changed condition of where we did it once, we got paid for it, now we got to go back and fix it until you negotiate that change order, there may be a gap in that time. But I said, sometimes it's just they put all the money on some of the front end stuff of what's going on, and then they just let things linger and they'll just never come back because they're pushing to go work everywhere instead of following a flow of where you want to go on the project. So you basically have a choice. The railroad splits and you can choose to keep going down the fiery path, or potentially you can set yourself up to get yourself out of that kind of situation. So one of the things that you can do is one of the solutions that I used on a project, or we used it on 2 projects, but one of them is something that's called Takt time. So to help teach you, I'm going to put on my engineer hat and walk you through this. So Takt is a German word for beat or rhythm. And it, like I said, the intention for it is, like a metronome. You want to be able to get a consistent flow through the project. This is something that has been used heavily in manufacturing. If anybody's familiar with the Toyota production system, TPS, this is one element of that. And it's a portion of the lean construction realm of concepts of how to fix a project. You don't want to just go straight for Takt. You got to start addressing some of the waste and some of the other elements to make sure you can have it to where people will be able to participate. But the main thing for Takt is you consider space, physical location as a resource. In a typical CPM, you kind of assume you have unlimited resources. You can be anywhere, go anywhere. You have enough crews to go work everywhere you want. And that's not always true. And so, like I said, Takt forces you to use space. You can't have somebody working on the ceiling while you're trying to put the floor in, because you're gonna have ladders or scafs and people may drop something with somebody else. So it's, like I said, using space as a limitation on your project. It can be a crew, material, or any other kind of constraint would make you create a buffer, which is just a space between activities, so you can keep your continuous flow going on the project. And any of the areas that you would have that don't fall into, for example, in this building, if you want to do all of the conference room spaces or the dining room spaces, you could put all 5 or 6 of them in this building together in a Takt flow of where crew 1 will start here. As soon as crew 1 is done here, they would move to number 2. Crew 2 would come into the first room. And like I said, everybody follows each other around like a train track. And the first thing, like I said, the main thing you want to do is you want to balance work available with the workers that are available. And this helps reduce variation in your project to where you have consistency, where you know what's going on and you're keeping an eye out and trying to find those roadblocks and waste and eliminate the waste before you actually get to it. So it's similar to how you can have like 4D scheduling. Now that people have a 3D model for the design, if you incorporate a schedule with it and make it a 4D model, you can model and see if you'll have, with clash detection, other things that you have in a 3D model, you can put time with that then also. And so essentially you get a chance to build it twice, which is something that is getting more popular nowadays, but it's still not something that's commonplace everywhere. So the first step in performing Takt is you got to do your data collection. So this can happen using a pool plan. basically you want to get everybody in the room that can make a decision for that entity. So if you have the mechanical sub, you want to make sure you have the foreman of the mechanical sub. You don't want to have the VP that's just going to come and be, that's not going to know all the intricacies of the project, because you want somebody who will know how they plan to do it, what the plan is going to be. I need to have this done by this person to know before I can start my piece of the work. That's one of the benefits of doing full planning. And you can use the existing CPM to set up the various milestones that you want to track against. And that's how you would do your full planning session. There's a lot more to it than that. I'm trying to keep it somewhat high level for you. Second step in this is you want to come up with your Takt zones and then your Takt time. So first I'll walk you through. So here would be an example of, you would split the floor plan of the building up. In this example, I'll split it into 2 areas. You want to try to balance the square footage to where it's roughly the same amount of work. You can get fancy and start doing zigzags around particular offices, but you want to try to keep like work together when you create your zone. A rule of thumb as a starting point is you want to kind of aim for about 10,000 square foot should be about the size you're looking to do. And you want to, and the starting point would be 5-day Takt time, a week, a normal work week, or whatever the normal work week is for the contractor. Warning though is, don't force anything to stay within those parameters. Let it move and breathe however it needs to make it a plan that you're able to efficiently implement. You don't want to use weekends as a catch up. There's a lot of people who will say, oh, well, it rained on Tuesday, so we'll just work Saturday to make it up. But once you start stacking up all the Saturdays, you're already working, maybe now you got to work Sundays, or you're not. Trying to get caught up on missed work is not a way to make this work. Once again, the goal is to get rhythm and flow through the project. And this is not something that only applies to a floor plan. You can use this for exterior, something vertical. You can use it for interior finishes. You could use it for interior rough end. You could do it for the entire project. There's just various ways that you can apply this. It doesn't have to, you don't have to try to create one. And it's not recommended to try to create one for the entire project, because then you kind of fall into some of the same tripping points that you would have from a CPM being created at the very beginning of the project, because you're not going to have the level of detail at the end of the job that would be able to give you that information. So in this example, so floors 2 through 8 would be something that would be similar for, you'd have the framing and then the window wall, or whatever the systems would be that you would have. You would create a window of time for the Takt time of what would apply for that project. And then you would be able to use the first floor as your comeback work. So it's your workable backlog is the term they use in Takt time. And so some of the crews would be able to do it, like the window guy or the framing guy would be able to go down to the first floor. Some of them may not be able to, because they may not be EFIS down on the first floor, or some, whatever the one particular trade would be. So I just wanted to emphasize that it doesn't have to be super repeatable, and it doesn't have to be just interior only. It can be something exterior going vertical. Third step in this is to identify the trade sequences that you're going to have in this. So once again, coming back to the train example, it doesn't matter what is in each of the train cars. The important thing is the train cars are all the same size. So you could have a double stacker in one, you could have just one thing in the other. You could have an empty one. It doesn't, the goal is everybody is moving through the system at exactly the same timing and pace of what's going on your project. So to help give you some more of the definitions of what Takt, of some of the other Takt definitions. So each of the railroad tracks, there's 2 railroad tracks in the picture. The 2 of those would be your Takt zones. So you have your train, which would be all of the combination of all of the Takt wagons, create the Takt train in that zone. And most of the time what you do is you create the detail once, and then you can just take and offset it to complete out the rest of the various areas that you have. It's part of the initial step. There's a refinement step that I'll get to shortly. And the Takt wagon is the intersection of time and space. So it's the distinct amount of time that you have in your calendar, and then that's how you come up with how long it's going to take to complete the work. So here would be an example of what could be in a Takt wagon. You could have like a 15-day activity that's in a 5-day window. So you would just say, okay, fine, this is only day 11 through 15 of 20 in this window. And if that activity finishes enough to where a subsequent task to that first one can also fit in that same Takt wagon. Or you're not trying to cram everything into one wagon, but you also just want to make sure you're not forgetting something. You want to make sure that if things need to be sequential, you can set those up. And this is accomplished usually by doing in the pool planning session. You would know that I can't do installation until I have the inspection. I can't have the inspection until we have the overhead done. Can't have the overhead until something else before it is completed. So here's an example of what one Takt plan looks like. Of course, this is a simplified idea of it. And what you can have in there is you can have an alphanumeric. It can be numbers, it can be letters, it can be whatever you want. Some kind of an identifier that works for you. So if you wanted to have S's for structural Takt, that this is the handoff point to get to interior rough ends, you could have something of that nature. You can have some flexibility with this. But once you want to come up with whatever it is, for the amount of time it's going to take to perform that task using your Takt window. It could be one person could be doing it in 3 days or 3 blocks of time. The next person may need to have 4. So what would happen is eventually there will be a gap and the two will start separating from each other because of how the progress will go for the project. So when that happens, you do an adjustment later on to move one way or the other to make sure everybody's lining up. And something else, one of the tricks that we did on our projects, we tried to use the same color for the various subcontractors, and then we would just use tones of that color to help show all of their work. That way, if you knew you were the yellow or brown contractor, you could look for the shades of your particular color. And so after the initial Takt is completed, you want to look for any roadblocks that you can potentially see in your plan. And so what happens then is you come up with something like this where you start gapping it, and things may fall across whatever your normal work week is. Some of that you just let things flow as where they need to go. And if you have if everybody in the room is planning on an activity completing on a Thursday, for example, it just doesn't always benefit the project for you to finish that early, because the next crew is thinking, I'm going to be there the day after. And if you mess them up, everybody may not be able to move back up those couple of days. So now you've thrown the plan off. And I said, the goal of this is to get that consistency and that plan of where, you come after, I'm the 4th one in line, and I come out to the job site to do a check-in, and I see we're on activity 2. I know how much time it is between then and when I can deliver my materials to be able to do the work that I need to do. And so the first thing you have on this will be your workflow. So the train of activities will show you what the workflow is. So you can tell in this example, it goes from crew 20 to number 2 across, and you jump down to the next set of rooms, and it goes from 20 to 2, and it goes across. So like I said, you have the same, everybody just flows through the project. So the workflow is horizontal. And then your trade flow. So now you know where the crew is going to be, and if you're going to need to add more crews or not. And this is not always something that gets incorporated into the CPM schedule. Normally, they'll create whatever the flow is for the area, and they may not always tie similar areas together. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Or they're just pick certain ones that tie together to kind of give you an idea of what the crew flow would be, the trade flow, excuse me. And I said earlier, so the other one is you look vertically, you'll know when you can deliver your material. So this helps with one of the reasons for waste is overproduction and just having material in the way. So I don't know how many times you've ever been out to a job site, and one of the areas is where they're storing all the insulation for the entire floor. So there's an entire room that you can't get to. So now you're gonna have to come back and do that work at some point. And when is that going to get scheduled? That's not always captured in a CPM schedule because that's a little bit too much of a finite detail. But if you know you only need to bring in 6-8 rooms worth or whatever it is that you're working on, then you'll be able to manage your materials and you get your next delivery ready to go, and there'll be a lot less clutter and all the workspace will be available because you don't have one huge space being occupied by material. And that's, so this is how you start finalizing the plan. And you want to try, like I said, you want to drive down costs if you can. You want to have, increase your efficiency and look at your quality. And so now we're going to jump into case study number 1. And this is a pretty good example of that project. It was about 75% complete, and there was very adverse relationships is probably the cleanest way I can put it between the various parties. A lot of reasons for delay. So the project it's a multi-story luxury apartment complex in a major Midwestern city in America. And there were about 35 units per floor. And when we started working on this project back in April 2021, contractor was using a summary level schedule that wasn't, they had the entire floor. I can jump to that here to help you out. They're showing the entire floor of the 30-some rooms. So it was a lot, everything was just large durations to start with, and then they weren't finishing the work. They didn't have any idea of when they were actually finishing certain wings of the building. And so that just had a carry-on effect of nobody really knew where to go or what to work on, because they were just being told, go do something, go to the 3rd floor. I need you to fix this one, fix this one thing in this one room, and then go back down to the 2nd floor or go up to the 5th floor. And all this stuff was happening. And, so the first trip when I went there, to help set up the Takt with them is gathered the information. So we sat down and say, hey, okay, what would it take for you to do, I kind of picked 4 or 5 or 6, I can't remember the exact number. We kind of picked to do this portion of it, how much time would you need? So we, everybody was in a room and we had that discussion, and it was just, it wasn't anything formalized. We didn't have a board. We didn't do a pool plan. It wasn't as detailed and involved as that. It was just more of a general discussion. So the people were willing to have that conversation. And so coming out of that, and one of the other reasons is the contractor was not showing the schedule to the subcontractor. They were just giving them a Word document with bullets of, you're going to be working here and here and here and here. And it's like, they had no idea what was going to happen more than 2 weeks out. And so that was kind of one of the problems on the project. Like I said, there was a lot of other reasons for delay. And so we divided up the project. Like I said, we aimed for a 10,000 square foot type size. We ended up going about 8,000 was kind of the average of what some of these rooms are. You can tell not all these rooms are the same size. So that's one of the other things, that you can apply Takt to something that's not super repetitive. Most people think, oh, this is really good. If you're doing a hotel or you're doing roadway where every segment's exactly the same, you can repeat everything. It's okay to have different sizes, but once again, you're looking at the whole Takt area, the zone, as where you're trying to get the combination of all the material. So here's what our first pass at the Takt plan was for case study number 1. And something then that you could do is, if you know what the crew size is going to be for a particular activity, we did this in Excel of where you can then add up how many number 15s or number 20s there are. And as you can see in the insert at the top there, you can see whenever there's going to be a hot spot for when the crews are going to be overloaded. So one of the things, like I said, the initial plan, you take this information and you can evaluate, okay, do we need to shift? Can we actually bring in 6 crews of number 20? Or do we need to find a way to space it out to where the maximum number we could ever get is 3? Now we have to space out and make sure that we don't overload the one crew. And so one of the other things on this particular project is the owner's representative was so happy. He was like, oh, I counted 135 workers today. We're doing great. Everything's on track. And it's like, no, it's not. Because what was happening is there would be a bunch of people doing cleanup activities, pushing brooms or straightening or doing other things. Like, yeah, there's a lot of bodies. What we need to focus on is what the crew composition needs to be. There needs to be a foreman, 2 operators, and 3 laborers. Those 5 or 6 people need to stay together working in one area as a cohesive unit. It's not to go, hey, can you go do this one thing over here and start laying out the hangers on the 4th floor? You go over there, you go run and get materials back at the shop, and now your 5-person crew is down to 1 or 2, and they're not working efficiently. And that's something that comes out then when the work is not getting completed in the 5-day window or whatever it is that you're trying to have in the project. And so looking at this, you could have, using the train yard kind of analogy. I like this one because you could look at the flooded areas could be stuff that was dealing with the late owner requested changes. They would get an answer on the light fixtures from the architect. They want them to, something need to be offset because there's a conflict in the ceiling. Architect would come up with the best answer, but then the owner would be like, no, we don't want that. We want to use something else, or we want that to stay where it is. And then that would create, okay, now we got a ceiling height issue. So it was just always something else happening that was, a ripple effect of the delays. And, and of course, this is all during COVID. Just like I said, we started this in 21. It was during COVID, so they had impacts for the material supply chain across the world. They actually had they had a pretty major outbreak on the job site, and a couple of I wouldn't able to go there for a couple months, but side issue. But like I said, you would have contractor delay, you'd have owner delay, you could have you have the path of where it's been so long that the grass has already grown over where the tracks are. You have work that's just kind of sitting there, you can't finish it, or you're waiting for something to happen. And there wasn't a good plan to come back and address all the comeback work because of the incompleteness of what's going on in the project. And so now we're going to move over to case study number 2. This one is not as bad as number 1. It was about 50% complete, and it just not quite a train wreck per se. It was pushing 4 or 5 months late. And so the owner brought us in to try to help the contractor come up with a recovery schedule. Well, they hired us to come in and do an evaluation of the project, see how bad it was, and then see if we could help them come up with a recovery plan. And so this started in June of 22, like it was about 50% complete. And this job was a lot more symmetrical. It was not perfectly, but it's a lot more symmetrical. Same kind of a project of its luxury apartments. It's in a different Midwestern town. So different owner, different contractor, different everything. So it wasn't like we had any carryover with the subs or any of that nature. But this one was easier for everybody to understand because it broke down into two, that naturally headed in 2 areas off of the plans. So area 9 had 5 rooms, area 10 had 5 rooms. Does anybody remember what a good starting point is for a takt time? Yes, no? Would be 5 days. So we were able to talk to everybody and say, hey, can you accomplish what you need to do in 1 room in 1 day? If you had nobody else in the room, you have it to yourself for 1 day. Can you get it done? And someone came back and said, I need 2 days. Their work is slightly more complicated. That's fine. But thinking of 1 room a day, everybody got that in their head. And eventually they're like, hey, this makes sense. Now we could have, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we came up with our initial plan. And so this is what that project's takt plan looked like. And so you have you see the diagonal flow of how the crews are going through, and you can see our color code of like different shades of the same color for the 1 sub. I said to try to help them get the visual, because if you're only the purple contractor, you can just go find yourself on 1 piece. This is the entire schedule. This would probably be maybe not quite 1,000 activity CPM schedule. It would probably be 15, 20 pages for this project. You have it all on 1 page. And it's repetitive, and where people know what the plan is. So like I said, if you're at the 4th car in a chain of 10, you know when your work is going to happen. And so so the owner's like, okay, well, 4 months late doesn't work for us. What can we do to get done by Christmas or by New Year's? And so one of the things so then the next step we had was we came up with a stacked takt plan. So I don't want to use the word acceleration or recovery plan and things of that nature, because we didn't actually resequence anything. What we did was we were able to take, knowing that 1 sub, we have 1 room, and there's 5 rooms in that area, you could potentially have 5 different contractors, each working in their own room. Everybody just kind of works around in clockwise or counterclockwise, and everybody would still have the same amount of time to perform their work, but it's just not going to take you 5 weeks. Now you get it all done in 1 week. Like I said, you're not actually forcing anybody to do anything different than they originally planned. It's just a different mentality. And that's part of the, you have to change your thinking when you're doing Takt planning, because I said it's whole plan, it's looking at it differently. You have a different goal in mind. And so one of the things that came out of this one is the contractor, they latched onto it. They actually came up with, in their weekly work plan stuff, when they'd have their meetings, they came up with a plan. They started color coding based off of our color. Like they started taking the Takt principles and then applying it to all the stuff. They all had Surface or, you know, whatever iPad, whatever machine it was. And they would go around and they would have the plan sheets color coded, and everybody knew, you know, and they started talking the language. It was very encouraging to see that happen. And it turns into, you know, the main thing is consistency is the key. So if you have, you know, the lessons learned that we had is if you go in trying to be the bull in China shop and you got to change this and do that and it's like you're not going to get very far with the people involved. But as soon as everybody started seeing the benefits of it, of where I have consistency now, I know what the plan is. And if you look at when you look back at the overall Takt plan, there is no critical path on it. Everybody has something to do almost every single day, or you know where you've come in. So if you know you can be gone for a week or two, you're going to trust that everyone else is going to be able to follow that, and you can go away for a week or two without impacting anyone else. That's not something that always happens in the CPM normal world, because they want everybody there all the time, regardless if there's work available for them or not. It gets back to that seesaw that I had of balancing work available with workers available. And the other main lesson learned is it's all about communication. So like I said, you can explain to the highest level to the lowest level within an organization on the project. Everybody can understand, you know, the plan. So that's one of the major ones that we learned out of it. And like I said, having those small wins, and you know, it kind of snowballed for us, and it was beautiful. Like I said, it kind of took over for itself, and it was great. It was enjoyable. The first one was not enjoyable because there were times I'm sitting in a room and my skin's curling, and I'm not even part of whatever it is they're discussing. It's like, oh my gosh, like paint's peeling off the walls, and these guys are so mad at each other. So in conclusion, the main thing is, like I said, clear, concise communication. And you want to be able to create a simplistic schedule. If you wanted to, you know, show that level of detail for each of the, you know, handful of rooms, you would add thousands of activities to a CPM. This is going to become a nightmare to update. It's easy to update in the field using the Takt plan, because it's just a colored square. You can either check it off that it happened or it didn't. If it didn't, you just take the whole chain and slide it over the 1 or 2 days or whatever it is that it's going to slip. And so like I said, it helps you with having that instant feedback system. And that's not always something you get with a CPM schedule, because the scheduler may only come out once a month. You know, they'll ask for the update sheet. Hey, give me the update of everything on the project. Here's what you're supposed to have been working on. And either you did work on it or you didn't. And so it helps eliminate activities that have a lot of float. So you're just trying to update things that don't need to be addressed and people concerned about. And managing the waste is also important. Like I said, if you can eliminate people standing around, you have useless, you put something down in one room, then you got to pick up and move it, and you got to handle it, go double and triple handling of materials. You could have just all the other reasons for waste. You can help focus on that to where you don't have that problem. I'll open it up for questions now.